welcome everyone. I'm Tiana Veldwisch from the Olin College class of 2008. On behalf of President Miller and myself, I want to thank you for joining us.
It's so great to see you, Tiana, and great to be here with so many folks from around the world. It's really remarkable what's possible with technology today.
It is. We know life isn't easy right now, so we're especially grateful to have each of you with us this morning. There are about 400 of us gathered together, which is really wonderful. We are all here because Rick has touched our lives in one way or another. Of course, we would have preferred to thank Rick in person for his deep contributions to changing engineering education. But the Olin community is nothing if not resilient and imaginative, and so the idea for a virtual event was born. For the next hour, we'll hear a few of the important lessons Rick has learned over the years, and we want to hear from you as well. But first, some housekeeping details. This event is being recorded. Today is a live two-way conversation, so if you have a question or a comment for Rick, please use the chat function to reach out, and don't be shy. Our event moderators will get to as many as we can. We hope you stick around for the full hour because Ken Stokes, Olin's chair of the Board of Trustees, will share a few words at the end and maybe a surprise or two. Okay, let's get to it. We asked you to send us a short video sharing a lesson you learned from Rick. After all, if there's one thing we all know, it's Rick is an educator at heart. Many of you were very generous with your time and your words, so we want to start this hour with some of the lessons you learned from Rick. Take a look.
One thing that I saw Rick doing really well over and over was empowering the people that he worked with and supporting them, giving them clear direction, but then getting out of their way and getting fantastic results, which I think surpassed even his highest expectations.
We only met a couple of times, but the last time I invited you to be the keynote speaker at the Danish University Summit in Denmark. And I asked around what the impression was, and one thing pops up from many of the participants. It is your focus on the student individual and mindset. Especially that the student mindset is absolutely crucial and can be defined, measured and learned. Not many people say anything so specific and to the point as you do. Thank you for that.
Understanding the problem is half the solution.
Things do not have to be done the way they've always been done.
Never to say no, because you never know what opportunities will bring.
The tugboat can move the aircraft carrier.
One thing I've learned from Rick Miller is that when you meet with academic visitors seeking inspiration from Olin, you may find yourself inspired.
When I was applying to faculty jobs and finishing up grad school last year, I had the opportunity to meet with President Miller to get his personal life story and advice. And he told me these words of wisdom. Do what you're good at and what you love.
Rick and I used to exchange emails about topics that had to do with rural kids, and what always got me is he would send them in the middle of the night. He would be up researching and answering, and that taught me you always make time for the things that interest you.
One lesson I learned from Rick Miller is to never settle for the status quo. Rick worked tirelessly to improve Olin and expand the community.
One thing I learned from Rick was to trust the students to be the perfect co-conspirators in imagining a new education system from the ground up.
Among the many things that Rick Miller has taught me was how to face ambiguity and be patient. Thank you, Rick.
Good leaders are great listeners. Rick is kind, he cares, his door is always open.
The many things that I learned from President Miller is the value of quiet leadership. I always appreciate his calm and steady presence.
I will never forget office hours with Rick Miller for statics and structures. He helped me pass that course and become a mechanical engineer. Thank you, Rick.
26 years ago, Rick, you hired a corporate guy to help build a college external relations initiative. You declared, "Let's make a big difference together." We proudly did that, and I thank you for it.
He is the innovator and revolutionary in higher education. Thank you, Rick, for making sure that higher education will move forward. Please stay well and keep inspiring the world.
Rick, that was such a lovely tribute to you and to Olin. What strikes me in seeing those tributes is how much impact Olin has had outside of its small campus. As an alum, I know how much Olin impacted my mindset and trajectory, as well as those of my 1,000 or so fellow alumni. And this video reminded me how great that impact has been on other institutions and organizations and individuals everywhere else as well.
Well, seeing those video tributes for the first time and remembering each of the people very well, I can't help but reflect back on how much I've learned from everyone else. I've been here trying to lead, but actually this institution and the people here have changed me in profound ways. So thank you everyone for taking time to do that. I'll never forget.
Well, we've heard from what some parents, faculty, staff, educators, and alumni have learned from you, Rick. And now it's time we hear from you. But first, I want to remind our audience, if you have a question or comment for Rick, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and our moderators will send them over as we can. Okay, so we're on to Rick's lesson number 1.
Looking back over what we've done in 20 years at Olin, one of the things that becomes really clear is that education is more than facts and more than job skills. Education builds judgment, it builds character, it shapes attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs in life. And in fact, if you look at the data, you can easily find that those things, those attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs, or what I'm going to call mindset, has a longer shelf life in determining your success in life than the facts that you learned, which often are superseded by later additions. How do you change attitudes, behaviors, and mindsets? And can it be changed? Well, the data shows, and I think some of the work that we've done at Olin shows, you can change this, and it's not as difficult as you think. It's not that you have to stop teaching the facts, it's that you're teaching many things at once. Every time you walk into a classroom and you pick up a piece of chalk, you're not just teaching calculus, you're also shaping a mindset. You may not even be aware of this, but you're doing it. How do you do this? Well, it turns out that hopeful faculty members spread hope among their students, and cynical faculty members spread cynicism. It's pretty easy to see when you look at the outcomes from students when they leave. Okay, so if this is something we need now to embrace, it needs to become mainstreamed and not just something we ignore in higher education. How in the world could you do that and pay for it with the limited budgets that we have? And I would say it's not as hard as you think. For example, if you look at the realities of interacting with people, it doesn't take any more time, it doesn't cost any more money for you to be kind to a person than it does to be rude. It's the same calculus that goes on. And you also find that students don't care what you know until they know that you care. And if we simply paid attention to our role as mentors and our role as guides and role models, we can make a significant impact on the long-term impact of character, attitudes, behaviors, and mindset.
If you want to send a question over or a comment for Rick, please find in your chat Q&A monitor. That's the one they'll be sending them over to us. So we have our first question. And I just, in reflecting on mindset, I've personally found that as a manager at work and now as a parent, I think about mindset and Rick's lessons about it pretty often. So our first question is, what's one thing that we can all do to be better mentors and guides?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? First off, understanding what a mentor is and what a guide is and what a teacher is and what a parent is, different roles require different types of behavior. A mentor is like a coach. A coach believes in you. A coach believes you can and will succeed, never gives up on you, is always in your corner. But that doesn't mean that they're a marshmallow and they have no expectations. They hold you accountable to achieving things. They ask you what you've done to meet the expectations. Do you have a plan? Because after all, a goal without a plan is just a wish. You have to have discipline, but you have to have someone who believes in you and is your corner, someone you can trust and rely on for years. If, for example, you have a real mentor years after you graduate, you still know that they care, and you can still call on them and they still know where you are in life. I was so fortunate to have a mentor as an undergraduate for 40 years, who was a very close friend of mine. I know what that feels like.
Thank you. We have a question from a parent. Out of all the choices you had as an educator, why join a college that didn't exist?
Well, that's a good question. I didn't grow up in life thinking this is what I would do. It wasn't what I sought out. It was the calling, I guess, that only could be achieved by starting over. I had spent 25 years in higher education in 3 different institutions, all large AAU institutions with focus on PhD education, being very frustrated with the change that needed to happen, but with the political roadblocks. Someone nominated me for this job when I was a dean of engineering at Iowa many years ago. I almost didn't bother to respond because it sounded sort of crazy starting with a blank sheet of paper and starting all over again. Why would you do that? I got letters from very trusted mentors who said, this is nuts, don't do this. You'll never get back to the mainstream if you do it. I went to visit Larry Milas, whose name is on the building that I'm sitting in right now. He's a very persuasive guy, and I realized what he was talking about is not a college, it's a cause. It's committing to something bigger than self. This was something so important that everything else I was doing paled in comparison. And then I had to persuade my wife to move back to Massachusetts, which was not a trivial thing to do. Olin's still a cause, and it's still worthy of everything we can do to make it happen. So I'm very glad that I got that letter from Larry Milas so many years ago.
Another question, what was it you most enjoyed about joining a startup?
Joining a startup. Naivete comes to mind. It's at the time, it sounded like such a great idea. All the frustrations in faculty meetings with people who didn't get it, and you had to try to persuade. This would be utopia, because there are no faculty and there are no students, so no resistance. And then you look at your inbox going through the roof and there's nobody to delegate to. It's a very different world. I guess the exhilaration is, for me, I've always been a person who couldn't help but envision how things could be better, and being frustrated that people didn't try. So this was the ultimate opportunity to do that. And I have some DNA in that area because I have a brother who's also an entrepreneur who's been involved in startups. So we share about this at the dinner table a lot.
That's
it's
great.
A disease, actually, it's not curable. So.
Well, here's a question from a student. As you look back on your time at Olin, what will you miss the most?
Oh, unquestionably, it's the people. You get into this because you have these lofty ideas about things that can be changed, but you stay in this because of the people that you meet and you interact with. So many people over the years have changed my lives and have touched so deeply. They're like family. I don't feel like I'm leaving the institution. I feel like I'm graduating. Carrying the torch for the change that Olin needs to the rest of the world, and trying to join really the class of 2020.
All right, welcome to the alumni. Next question, Rick, does partner year feel like a long time ago or just yesterday?
Partner year was such an incredible thing. Yes, it seems like it was both a long time ago and also fresh and happens every day. The partner year experience, for those who may not be from Olin, had to do with 15 boys and 15 girls who spent a year in construction trailers on the parking lot at Olin while the campus was being built, during which we experimented almost every day. We learned so much from the students in that year. We learned really, for one thing, we learned that engineering is not a body of knowledge. Engineering involves knowledge, but engineering is a process. If you think of the Wright brothers jumping off of the hill with these wings on their back 1 million times and then saying there must be a better way, we learned this from the students. And we also learned that when students are engaged in this, when they actually are trusted with the responsibility to build things that are important, it changes who they are too. They become 2 feet taller with this commitment to, yes, I can change the world. If I only have a few people like me and a couple of old guys to ask questions once in a while, I too can make a difference in the world. And that's the most profound thing that happened at the beginning of Olin, and it's still true today.
That's great. Question from Sharon B. What is the most difficult decision you have had to make at Olin?
Oh man, there are so many. Well, even the decision to have an Olin partner year was difficult. This was at a time when we were not going to get the buildings built on time. And we had students coming. We were worried about a lot of the conflicts that had to be worked out. And we had a crisis meeting, and the small leadership team decided we couldn't just say no. Then we had to persuade the board to support it. We've had some tragedies at Olin along the way. We've had some difficult times, including in the last few months with this pandemic. There's a long list of difficulties. Anybody who's tried to start an institution from a blank sheet knows that there isn't a guidebook on this, that you start out in one path and you never wind up going in the direction that you thought at the beginning. It's always about discovery of new directions along the way. Emotion plays a key role in it, keeping that passion in the back of your head, the vision on where you're going, and improvise. That's really the trajectory that we're on.
Great. From Maurice H. Rick, what have you liked about living in Needham?
Needham is such an amazing community. I still remember, Mo, when we first met you, and we were trying to figure out whether Needham would be a town that would accept a new college. We were adjacent to Wellesley, who had 2 colleges at the time, and we needed to persuade Needham to be willing to give us a building permit. The town was so welcoming. It's been such a partnership ever since. I don't know that we could have asked for a better community anywhere in the country to start a college than Needham. A place to raise your kids, a place to do business, a place to grow. It's been amazing. So thank you to the town of Needham.
All right, well, let's get on to the second lesson that you wanted to share, something we know a little about at Olin, experimentation. And just another reminder, if you have questions or comments, please keep them coming, send them to Q&A Monitor, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next bit.
Another lesson that we learned at Olin over the years, and it's become really almost the central theme of what the college does, is experimentation and a culture of experimentation. It seems simple on the surface that you only learn things by trying things that are new. This would be really clear in any kind of business. However, it turns out in higher education, it's quite rare. Higher education has changed less than almost any other sector of our economy over the last 1,000 years. Higher education tends to value criticism, critique at a much higher rate than it does experimentation and trying completely new, crazy ideas. The fear of being ridiculed for doing things that are not successful is so high that it tends to be an inhibitor in people trying really new things. If you try things, you will learn amazingly new insights, and it will even change who you are. We don't do enough of this. In fact, changing higher education is the mission of Olin. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about how you actually change higher education. Do you do this by writing a book and calling it the Olin Way? Do you create a YouTube video that says, here's how you do this? I think actually Buckminster Fuller, the architect, may have had the best answer when he said, when you want to really create change, don't bother trying to explain why it's needed. Just build a new model that makes everything else obsolete, and the world will notice and find their way to your door. I think this actually explains better than most other methods why it is that Olin has been visited by more than 900 universities from 65 countries in 10 years. We didn't pay them to come. Making change is not easy. It requires a willingness to take risk and to be humble that things may not work the first time. In fact, as an engineer, I can tell you nothing that I've engineered over my lifetime ever worked the first time that I tried it. Humility is a part of being an engineer because nature tends to show you all of the things that you did wrong. So creating experimental methods in higher education is a mission that Olin has embraced from the beginning, and I believe is largely responsible for the success that we've had so far. We need more of this in higher education, and Olin can lead the way.
There are a lot of people online who want a chance to ask you a question, Rick, so let's get right to it. This is a two-parter from Liz R. What was the biggest challenge you hadn't anticipated, and what did you expect to be difficult that turned out not to be?
I guess one of the biggest challenges that I ran into, of course, was trying to get the people assembled and trying to get a plan built on what we're going to teach. What does it mean to be an engineer? What does it mean to be educated in the 21st century? The great temptation there is to go write this down on a white paper and put it on a bulletin board and have everybody follow it. Those of you who grew up in Olin know this. We have this story at Olin a lot. It turns out that that's easy, but it's not the right thing to do. And here's the reason why. I think the effectiveness of teaching can be thought of as a product of two numbers. One of them is the content knowledge that you're really competent in, 1 to 10, and the other one is your passion and your ability to inspire other people to want to learn it, 1 to 10. If both of those numbers are 0, or either of those numbers is 0, you don't get anything out. So you can only teach what you know. So of course, content is important, but inspiration is really key. So if you're going to do this right, you're not going to tell people what to teach. You're going to help them discover it so they care about it and it's their story and they want to tell it, and that way they inspire others. Getting that to work is tricky. And getting that to work is not something where you stand in front of people and you wag your finger and you tell them what to do. Turns out you make a lot of noise, but they don't do the right thing. So there's some risk in it. Are things that happen much better than I expected? Well, for one thing, the type of person who came to Olin was more self-selected, was more passionate. I thought we would get good students, in part because of the location, lots of college students in Boston, in part because of the scholarship. I didn't know how we would do in recruiting faculty. The faculty that we have brought here are to die for. These people could be at any institution in America. We're routinely competing with the top research universities in the world for the folks that come. That was much easier than I expected.
Great. Question from Juhi B. I apologize if I mispronounce your name. I work at Ahmedabad University, a partner university, and staunch believer of learning by doing. How has COVID changed our education system?
Oh man, we're just learning now how COVID can change it. Sure, it makes it more complicated. You can't be in the same room easily. It's very hard to build stuff in a shop if you're 3,000 miles away in your basement. A lot of things will have to change. But that doesn't mean that we don't still learn by doing, and that it isn't still just as true. Collaboration happens in corporations today. We're learning how to collaborate over the internet with people thousands of miles away. In fact, one way of thinking about this, if you look at these Zoom meetings all day, which many people are in, and it looks like Hollywood Squares TV screen with these little faces, you can't be watching for an hour without noticing, for example, that the person in the top right-hand corner is just so articulate. They seem to have a long stream of ideas that are really game-changing, and they're able to inspire other people on the call somehow to make change in their behavior. On the other hand, there's a person, say, in the lower left-hand corner that hasn't said a word in 2 hours. As an employer, you're obviously attracted to what is it about that person in the top right corner that's making this happen. How do we prepare people like that? They have to be independent thinkers. They have to be able to be self-motivated without a whole lot of guidance. They don't need a great deal of structure. They're great at improvising. Those are skills we can create in higher ed if we focus on it. And I believe that we're just at the leading edge of figuring out how to do that.
That's great. King Chow wants to know, if you were going to start Olin over again, how would you do it differently? Or would you do it the same way using the same principles?
That's a really tough question. Of the hundreds of universities that come to see us all the time, many of them are from different countries, and they're doing exactly that. They're thinking about starting a new institution. For one thing, I believe that Olin has been so fortunate. I'm not sure if we started Olin again today in exactly the same place, the same resources, that we would succeed, or that we would come out anywhere near what we did today. So don't undervalue the importance of being fortunate and being lucky at everything that you do. It's too easy to do that. Secondly, everyone who's trying to start a new institution, I usually make a couple of observations with. One of them is, do your best to figure out what it's going to cost to make this work. Whatever you think it is, double it. Do your best to figure out how long it's going to take to get it built and running it so that it's ready for prime time. However long you think it's going to take, double it. You'll still be wrong, but maybe you'll be with the right order of magnitude at this point in time. The most important thing, I believe, it's not worth starting. The world doesn't need just another college. You need to do something that's worthy of people's time and effort. That's in the impact and in the quality area. It's very hard to measure impact and quality, particularly at the beginning. It's very easy to measure budget and schedule. So if you're going to make a mistake, it's largely because you put too much emphasis on how much did it cost and did you get it done on time. Not enough emphasis on the inspirational value of the high-end quality that you're trying to create.
Okay, this is a curious one, and switching gears a little from that. Linda Canavan wants to know, what is your favorite location on campus?
Oh, dear Linda. That's a really good question. I don't have a chance to spend much time in the academic center, although that's where my heart is, because I don't get a chance to teach very often. So I spend most of my time in my office here in Milas Hall or in the dining hall. And most of the time that I spend in the dining hall is having lunch with faculty, with staff, and with students. And I have to say that's probably the place I enjoy the most.
Heather K asks, what thoughts do you have about what changes need to be made to middle school math and science education?
Oh, wow. I wish I were an expert in this area. I guess the main thing that I'm concerned about with middle school math and science education is the teachers. Who do we attract to go into that field? Do we compensate them enough? And do we provide them with the autonomy and with the empowerment to make the decisions they need in order to really evolve the education in a direction that will make an impact? My main concern, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for my math teacher in high school, Miss Walters. I still remember her very well. I think every kid who graduated from our high school had Miss Walters for 4 years if they went to college. But Miss Walters wouldn't be there today because we've fixed a really important problem in America, that when she was a student in that generation, the career paths open to women were quite limited. She could have been an administrative assistant, she could have been a nurse, she could have been a teacher, and that's pretty much it. Today, she could work for Google or for Facebook and make many times the amount of money that she made as a high school teacher. And so we fixed that, and they're now gone. But we didn't backfill. There aren't the same kinds of rewards for teachers in middle school that there were before. And then, of course, we're testing things to death. If they don't do well on the test, then apparently it must be the teacher's fault. I think if you'd ask the teachers who are in the classroom and give them more freedom and more autonomy to make change to teach, we would be in a better position. But I'm not a middle school math teacher, and I could be wrong.
All right. Bruce Patton wants to know, what unsuccessful experiment taught you the most?
Oh man, there's a long list of those. We tried lots of things that didn't work. I guess one of the surprises, and this will sound like it's on the side, but it was quite important at the time, athletics. We thought that Olin students would want to be involved in the full range of activities as young people that people at other schools would, including athletics. Our vision was that they would play alongside the students at neighboring Babson College in NC2A competition. Babson was all for this. You know, we've been doing this for 20 years now, and we still don't have the opportunity for our kids to compete in any athletic competition with NC2A distinction. And the reason is the people at the other institutions were unwilling to allow Olin students to join. That was a surprise. I'm trying to figure that out. We've had a lot of other experiments as well. We tried things at the beginning in the curriculum. We actually had this vision that we needed to be very deliberate about change, that everything at Olin has an expiration date, including the curriculum. And this was to hold ourselves accountable. Well, it turns out that we wound up completely reinventing the entire curriculum 3 times before the first class graduated. Maybe we did this a little too much. The reason we did it was that a lot of the experiments we tried just didn't work. The students will tell you that. I mean, the culture at Olin empowers students to raise their hand and say, excuse me, professor, I know you think you're teaching structural mechanics, but we don't understand what matrix algebra means. Can you go back and do that again? It's this interaction that catches the failures before they collapse, which enables us to iterate and to get to an answer that works at the end.
That's certainly my experience. Okay, last question for this section. This is from Rob Meyerson. What are your plans for your post-Olin career?
Oh, what am I going to do now that I'm graduating? Well, I'm going to graduate school. So next year, I'm going to be a visiting professor at MIT for a year. I'm very excited about that. MIT has a lot of exciting things going on, including reinventing their undergraduate program in engineering. This will give me a chance to see what it's like to try to employ some of the same ideas in a completely different environment with a lot more structure. And by the way, MIT is regarded as the #1 engineering school almost everywhere. It's a lot harder to convince people to let go of the steering wheel and to make change when that's what happens, than it is in an institution with a blank sheet. I am convinced that a lot of what Olin has learned has nothing to do with engineering. It has everything to do with learning. I think liberal arts education really needs to be re-examined. I'm not sure that undergraduate majors make sense anymore. This was an idea from the Industrial Revolution, where specialization was key. I think that can happen in graduate school. So I have a lot of crazy ideas, and I have a lot of friends in higher ed, and I'm going to try to follow this cause, which is greater than self, and see where it leads.
Well, we'll all be eagerly watching to see what your postgraduate plans look like. All right, so the final lesson that you wanted to share with us is perhaps the most important, and it's about truth.
This global pandemic has changed the way we live. It's changed higher education. It's going to change Olin. As I think about it from an educational point of view, there are lots of lessons here to be learned, but one of the most disturbing to me is the inability, apparently, of the public to understand and interpret facts and truth. This is really important. As a natural scientist, truth really matters. Truth doesn't have anything to do with opinions. Truth has to do with nature. Natural law actually doesn't give partial credit. You get it right or you don't. And this is the discipline that we need to teach in a field like engineering. But it's pretty clear that the public perception of truth has quite a spectrum of differences. On the one hand, we have the traditional academic discipline, which says truth is what emerges from experiments that are done independently and peer-reviewed with confidential peer reviews. And only when the consensus arises do we declare that as being true. This is how science progresses. This is how we're going to beat the pandemic. On the other hand, there's a different kind of truth that is determined by how many people agree with you. And being unable to distinguish between those two is, I think, a failure of education. So we need to do better at this. So how could we do better? What are the kinds of things that we need to do? One of the things is going on right now at the University of Washington in Seattle. They have developed a course a couple of years ago which tries to teach people the discipline and the art of skepticism and the ability to look carefully at conversation, at information, and parse out those things which are exaggerated, those things which are maliciously designed to persuade with disregard for objectivity. This is a discipline we could learn. So one of the things that I'm taking away from the last couple of months is that we need to do a better job in higher education of preparing people to be constructively skeptical and to form opinions and conclusions based on facts.
All right, we have a lot of questions for you, Rick, so if you're ready for a few more. Olin parent Peggy Jenkins asks, how can we convince students, especially rural and small town kids, to aim high?
Oh, that's a really good question. Having grown up in a really small town, Peggy, we've talked about this many times, it's hard sometimes to imagine because the world seems so complex and so sophisticated that how you could ever become competent enough and be successful enough that people would give you the opportunity to try things. I think working on small projects first, here's what I would say. And I've worked with kids before who grew up in an environment where they didn't believe in themselves. They didn't believe that these things were possible. So it takes time. You have to start with a project that they care about. You have to invest in it in a way that provides just the right amount of scaffolding to keep them from falling off the edge, but not so much that they're following a cookbook. And they have to try things that they don't think they can succeed at. And then when they exceed their own expectations, you see a change in their whole attitude and behavior. If they do that like 3 times, you now have created a doubt in their feeling convinced that they could never succeed at things. You can light a fire. I've seen this in many places. One of the most inspirational people that I know has started a school called the Big Picture Company. It's in Providence, Rhode Island. He has went into failing high schools in predominantly urban areas and started with having kids, for example, start a company that sold water. I mean, how can you lose? Water is free. So you put it in bottles and, and the kids who did it didn't believe it would work. They never saw anyone in their family succeed. But by the time they had completed it and actually sold it, gone to the bank and got a loan, figured out how to market it, they were like 90% of them go on to college. I think this principle could happen in any school, but it's not going to work if you hold them to standardized tests and don't give them an opportunity to try projects.
Alex Calvin says, as a parent, I want to thank you for all you have done for our students and wish you the best.
Oh, thank you, Alex. I think I should be thanking you for all that you've done for me to give me an opportunity to work with your children.
Susie Weaver asks, how do you see Olin changing in the future? Do you recommend any plans to expand the size of the student body or any new majors, anything else? Or do you feel like the current model is worth keeping as is?
Well, that's for my successor. I personally believe that Olin is poised to make a much bigger impact and probably to work beyond engineering. I'm hearing this from lots of the institutions that come to visit us all the time. I think that Olin's learning could infect change in ways which change the identity, agency, and purpose of students everywhere. It's what I call life transformative education. The reason I believe this so strongly is because of the letters that I get from parents about the changes they've seen in their young students from the time they first arrived at Olin until when they left. So Olin is poised to do lots of things, and it will take a decade in order to make that happen, and I can't be here for another decade. So I'm sure the next president will answer that with help from the community in the next year.
An alum, Tom Cecil, asks, hello, Rick. If you could assign 1 or 2 books for an Olin alum to have on his or her 2020 lifelong Olin curriculum, what would those be?
Oh, Tommy, it's good to hear from you. Yes, reading books is a really important thing. It certainly changed who I am. I can remember how this first started, Tommy. I gave a commencement address in which I gave all the students their final homework. And their final homework is that for the rest of your life, every semester, you have to read at least one nonfiction book in an area outside of your field. If you do this, I believe it will change who you are. And you should read at least one book with an author for whom you completely disagree, because we are in such a polarized world that people tend to only listen to things that they already agree with. And then the student came up to me afterwards and said, "So, Dr. Miller, what are you reading?" Oops. So I now carry books in my briefcase constantly, and I'm trying to read a number of them as we go forward. One of them that we recently explored and had the author on campus at Olin, who I think is very important, is Shoshana Zuboff. She's a professor at Harvard Business School, at least she's an emeritus professor there. And she's written a book, I'm trying to remember the name of it now, called the Surveillance Economy. That's what it's called. And this is about how AI and the power of social media is changing society today in ways that were unexpected and unintended. And for all new engineers, I think we need to be aware of how this is happening. There are lots of others. I've read at least 15 or 20 in neuroscience and in education. They're more accessible than you think. So thank you for bringing that up, Tommy.
Gopal Joshi asks, how did you impact mindsets of faculty members?
Well, that's a good question. I don't have as much direct interaction with faculty as I'd like. And so I'm not entirely certain how much I have personally had to do with their mindset. I know that Olin has quite an elaborate process for recruiting faculty. And so we do attract a lot of faculty who already have the mindset that we're looking for. Olin is not in the mainstream. We don't offer tenure. The place has a commitment to continual change and improvement, and everything has an expiration date. Not every faculty member would sign up for that. The ones that do, I think, are predisposed to be idealistic and to be interested in a cause. Having said that, I think the basic ideas that we had at Olin, that learning things by actually making them and failing and making them and failing, we call it the do-learn cycle, is not the mainstream of thinking in higher ed, but really does change who you are. And I think our faculty have had their mindset molded by this and by the interaction with students as well.
Nick Payton from the class of 2011 asks, how has the balance between experimenting with the educational process and using established lesson plans and class structures changed over time?
You know, that's a really good question too. I'm probably not the best person to answer that because the provost is much closer to what's actually happening today in the curriculum than I am. But what I'm seeing is a pattern. Take, for example, someone like Rob Martello, the Wizard of Oz at Olin that almost all our students know. He has this pattern of partnering, collaborating with a faculty member from a different discipline around a contemporary issue, which is really important. I think right now, he and Katrin Lynch are planning a course next year having to do with the election and with how citizenship has changed in America. This pattern, I think, has been really important through the years and has really molded what we do at Olin. So I'm not sure that at the most fundamental level that Olin has changed that much in terms of its goals and its outcomes, but I'm sure that in every semester, our original ideas have changed a lot. One of the most important recent advances that's happened at Olin is this program that was inspired by one of our recent trustees who unfortunately passed away, which I think we call the Innovation Fellows Program. This allows us to take a couple of faculty members offline, out of the classroom, from their relentless responsibilities for interacting with students daily, and allowing them to think more long-term about experiments which have a bigger horizon, and then to think about assessing how those do. That's new, and I think that's really profound and can really shape the direction that we go in.
Next question is from Tice Sparrow Spidey. How do you see the future of higher education?
Oh boy, how do I see the future of higher education? There has never been a time in my lifetime, possibly ever, where the world depends on higher education more than it does now. With the pandemic, with the rise of nationalism around the world and the difficulty in getting people to collaborate, we need enlightenment, and we need truth, and we need vision, and we need young people who are committed to do whatever it takes to make a better world. Unless you have a fundamental understanding of science, of literature, of humanity, I don't think the world has a chance. Probably the most obvious way of seeing this is to look at a graph of human population over all of history. It's very easy to do. Google it. It will surprise you. It will look like a hockey stick. I mean, the population was less than 1 billion for millions of years. And then about 1900, it started shooting upwards. It's at 7 billion now. We're heading for 9 billion in the middle of this century. And the last time I looked, the resources that the Earth has is not growing. This growth, this explosion in population is going to require us to think in a completely different way. We no longer can think like Americans, like Europeans, like Latin Americans, like Asians. We are one big family. And if we don't learn how to cooperate and to work on these global problems together, I don't know how we're going to survive. And education is the key.
All right, that was a really big question. So I think we're gonna close with that one and move on. So before we wrap up, we want to share with you some more of the touching video tributes from people around the world.
The one lesson that I've learned from Rick Miller is the impact that a single individual can have on those around them. If a single individual has hope, then those around them will have hope. And in Rick's case, if a single individual has a vision, then he can share that vision with others and help to make it grow. Thank you, Rick, for all that you've done for Olin, and all best wishes for the future.
Rick Miller taught me that by collaborating and working together, educators and employers can focus on the needed outcomes and then redesign how students learn and, as a result, what they learn. The end result is a better employee, a better citizen, a better person.
What I've learned from Rick is that if you're going to teach engineers, then you better engineer your teaching. Good luck, Rick.
You and Olin have had an enormous impact on the development of engineering education. You have created trust, beliefs, and not at least respect and prestige to these new, very, very suspicious learning methods like active learning and PBL. Luckily, you will still be around. I'm looking forward to meeting you next year in Aalborg. So all the best from here.
Under his leadership, we have not just a great school with outstanding graduates and a great reputation, but Olin has really become known as a thought leader, helping define what 21st century education should be.
I would like to express my deep thanks to your outstanding leadership in the innovation of engineering education by bringing back our attention to the core value of engineering. That is, to create, to serve the people across the globe. The lesson we definitely keep in the future.
I've learned that successful educational leadership requires embracing innovation, seeking out meaningful collaborations, and most importantly, staying engaged and connected.
Of the many things that I've learned from Rick Miller, the one that sticks in my mind particularly is around student mindsets. His thinking around the importance of developing student mindsets, but also the ways in which these mindsets can be developed at Olin College and elsewhere.
He expressed the very simple notion that virtually everything in the curriculum needs to have a sell-by date, just like the refrigerated section of the supermarket. That whacked me over the head at that moment and has stuck with me for the rest of my life as a college president and an academic.
You're one of the first and the most successful higher education entrepreneurs.
You have shown that even a middle-aged college professor can create something new.
He shared many, many stories of the great accomplishments of Olin in changing engineers and engineering schools, and seldom, if ever, used the word I.
I'm really hoping that you'll keep on going so we could learn more.
Thank you from the bottom of our heart for helping to make Olin what it is. We couldn't be happier with our daughter's education.
Thank you for your leadership of Olin, Rick. Congratulations for where we are today.
An example of creative, firm and gentle leader, someone any institutions would be proud to follow.
Thank you and wish you all the best in the future.
I want to thank you and congratulate you in person that your amazing contribution in engineering education.
Congratulations on navigating Olin to the incredible place it has in the world today. Great faculty, great students, and organizations that are inspired by Olin all around the world.
It's now my privilege to introduce Ken Stokes, the chair of Olin's Board of Trustees.
Thank you, Tiana. As Tiana just said, my name is Ken Stokes, and I'm fortunate to be the father of a 2012 Olin graduate. I've been a member of the Olin Board of Trustees for the last 9 years, including serving as the chair for nearly 5 years now. And I'd like to just start this morning by thanking the literally hundreds of you around the country and indeed the world who've taken the time to join the event today. As I was paging back and forth through the multiple screens of participants, I've seen many people that I've met and been fortunate to spend time with at Olin, but even more of you that I've never met that just kind of warmed my heart to know the extent and breadth of the Olin community. In addition, on behalf of everyone participating, I also want to thank Tiana and Rick. The last hour has been absolutely wonderful. If we think of this as Rick's capstone presentation, I know many of us in the audience, certainly myself included, will be thrilled to have seen it live and almost in person. When I first met Rick during a candidates weekend in 2008, I had no idea at that time that I'd have the privilege of working with and getting to know him as well as I have over the last 10 years. And what we just witnessed today is simply Rick being Rick, a passionate and brilliant educator focused on the well-being of others and on making the world a better place, and an individual whose collaborative and humble leadership style has influenced the development of Olin in countless ways. But telling you all about what you probably already know from your own experience and interactions with Rick is not why I've been invited to take part in today's event. Instead, I'm here to share some news that I know will be warmly welcomed throughout the Olin community and well beyond. I originally envisioned making this announcement while standing on campus on a sunny day in the Oval before a very large and enthusiastic crowd, together with others from Olin who would be joining me to sing Rick's praises. But since that's obviously not possible at the moment, this large virtual gathering seems like a pretty good substitute and will just have to do. So I'll be brief and to the point. As you may have seen in the press release sent out early this morning, on behalf of the Board of Trustees and with their unanimous and enthusiastic support, I'm very pleased to announce that the Academic Center will be named to honor Rick for his vitally important role in the creation of Olin and all that the college has achieved under his leadership. It will henceforth be known as the Richard K. Miller Academic Center. Underscoring the Board of Trustees' enthusiasm for honoring Rick in this manner, let me read to you what I said in the announcement released earlier today. There is no more deserving and lasting tribute we could bestow on Rick Miller than naming Olin's Academic Center in his honor. His passion, endless energy, and caring and humble leadership are key to the success Olin has enjoyed and the contributions the college has made to higher education under his guidance. It is only fitting that Rick's name will now be on Olin's most important building. Congratulations, Rick.
Well, thank you, Ken. Thank you, Board of Trustees, and thank you, Tiana, and to everyone for joining us online today. The fact that more than 300 and some people from around the world chose to spend an hour with us looking at a Zoom screen is simply amazing, and it's so kind. I also have to say to the many people, dozens actually, who've written me wonderful letters in the last month or two that deserve more than a thank you, and I have not been able to respond to, please be patient. It's been a really stressful period with the pandemic and with the transition in leadership I'll get to it. I'm honored beyond words by this extraordinary gesture from the Olin College Board of Trustees and the Olin community. And I'm deeply humbled by this permanent recognition. It's not something I ever imagined. I'll be forever grateful to all of you who contributed to building this extraordinary institution. It's been the greatest privilege of my professional life to be chosen to lead this institution from its inception. And as I prepare now to leave, it's very much like leaving a part of my family. My heart will always be here. When I first arrived at Olin, it was only an idea, not yet a place. The college then consisted of 5 people, the 4 directors of the Olin Foundation, and me. There were no buildings, no faculty, no students, nothing. Just an inspirational vision provided by the foundation and, of course, their enabling financial commitment. I could never have imagined that we could accomplish so many things together and that this tiny institution in Needham, Massachusetts would become so influential in the world of engineering education. But then there are many things I could never have imagined. I could never imagine that I would still be here 21 years later as president of the institution. I could never have imagined that we would have more than 1,100 alumni working around the world and working hard to change the world to make it a better place. I could never have imagined that an introvert from a small farm in Tranquility, California would travel the globe sharing Olin's story and people would actually want to hear it and learn from it. Recently, I was cleaning out my home office in preparation for the move. I came across the white paper that I wrote in 1998 that was essentially my audition for the role of president of Olin College. I guess it worked because I got the job. In 8 pages, it outlined my original vision for Olin. Now, mind you, Olin didn't exist at that time. I wrote, and I quote, "Since Olin does not aspire to be large, personal attention will always be a major feature of the educational experience. Each student matters. There's a sense of crafting engineers one at a time to build on individual strengths and interests, to develop the whole person. It's the goal of Olin to provide a level of personal attention to each student which is comparable to that required to teach performing artists, such as a concert pianist or an actor. In a very real sense, each graduate of Olin is a work of art that carries the mark of Olin College." As I read those words today, written so long ago, I'm amazed to think how closely we have followed the spirit of that original vision. So thank you to the Olin students and alumni, who are all truly works of art, to all the faculty and the staff who believe in Olin and work hard every day to make our vision a reality. And thanks to all of you here with me today on this Zoom call. You have each touched my life in one way or another, and perhaps the lessons for which I'm most grateful are what I've learned from all of you. Thank you.
One of the hardest parts of this pandemic has been being separated from the people and communities that mean a lot to us. For me, one of those communities is Olin, and as I look at my screen and see so many familiar faces, it warms my heart too. Thank you, Rick. Thank you for your support over the years. Thank you for everything you've done for Olin and for education for well over 21 years. We know this is not the last chapter in your book, but is the end to one of perhaps the longest chapters, and I might even say the most meaningful. I think all of these people from around the world who gathered together with us today is a testament to that. Just before we go, we're going to switch to gallery mode to view as many people here as possible. We ask, if you can, find the video settings, bottom left, little video setting widget, and display 49 guests. We won't be able to see everyone. And of course, will be teeny tiny little faces on the screen, but we want to see as many together as possible. And those of you who have a sign, now's the time to hold it up and say thank you and give a round of applause to Rick Miller, employee number 1 and Olin College president for 21 years. Thank you for being with us today.